Good. Welcome back, everyone. I hope the break was at least a few minutes to take a breath, have something good to drink, and hopefully something good to eat as well. Our first speaker of this session is Dr. Brandon Kozar. He has spoken on a number of occasions that I've been in, and I've loved every word he has said. He works at Nationwide Children's Hospital. He's a doctor of psychology, and he's going to talk about finding your us. Dr. Kozar.
Okay, first step, microphone's working. So as Pat said, I give a lot of presentations and speeches. I really enjoy this work, and when you have a lot of time giving talks, you pick up some little insights along the way, like when it's best to actually present, given the time and the order of presentations. And one of the best times to present, just as a tidbit for everybody in here, if you're ever asked to present at a time, is that you want to go after like the heavy kind of didactic educational piece, or anybody who's talking finances or accounting, because then anything you say afterwards is like really interesting and fascinating to the audience. What you don't want to do if you're presenting is go immediately after Chris Jones. Like I'm sitting there in the back and I'm going like, this is like beautiful. I'm like in this, like I'm going into this dream of this like wonderful story. And then I thought, oh no, I have to go right after him. So Chris, again, you're a wonderful man and you're wonderful at what you do. So thank you for that. And yes, applause for him. Just to then make the comparison even more real for all of you, as now you have to listen to this schmuck talk for a few seconds. So, but no, thank you all for being here. So for the time that I have, we're going to be talking about this concept of finding your us, and really the agenda is going to be pretty straightforward here. We're really going to kind of talk about and recognize really what I think ultimately PPMD does, not just for advancing the science and supporting the research, which is obviously critical for ending Duchenne's, but really the community that I think it represents, especially, and not just for the scientists and the clinicians, but for the families and for the parents and the grandparents and for the children. We're going to advocate for the priority of these things. We're going to stand when more social support is needed. And what does it actually really good social support look like? In preparation for my presentation and talking to Pat and other members of PPMD, they said, Brandon, we want your presentation to be very uplifting and motivating. And so naturally, the first thing I'm going to do is start off with some information that's very depressing for all of you. And what many people have said that they've been feeling, particularly over the last several years of your life. So here's Kermit, our exhausted Kermit the Frog. I work at Nationwide Children's Hospital. I talk to a lot of the clinicians there, talk to a lot of the nurses, the physicians. I still have a private practice. I talk to a lot of folks outside of medicine, and I hear the consistent story about how tired they've been through the pandemic and everything that's ensued. Here's another picture of some exhausted. That's kind of cute, isn't it? I put that up there, right? Yes, they're super cute. He's very tired. The other thing, though, that we know that a lot of people have been experiencing, which is really, the basis of why I think the content we're going to be sharing here is so important, is this experience right here. Isolation and loneliness. This is another thing that I've heard too often that we've actually been seeing as well. In fact, the pandemic actually started a trend in this area. And what we've noticed and what we've seen is that the current state of affairs really started before the pandemic, but has only picked up since. We've had less in person in a lot of our interactions and our activities within our lives. Remember, I'm a psychologist, so I'm all about kind of the in-person connections. We have our cell phones, we have social media, we work from home, from school, we use our email, we do all these things, and the result is that we hear more and more people talking about being increasingly socially isolated. In fact, loneliness in America really is something that we have to be very concerned about. A 2018 national survey by Cigna actually showed that loneliness levels are at an all-time high. This was 2018. I do not have the data to show what transpired since the pandemic, but we certainly know and can anticipate that these trends have not improved. Nearly half of the 20,000 US adults that were surveyed reported they sometimes or always feel alone. 40% reported that they sometimes feel that their relationships aren't meaningful, and they oftentimes feel very, very isolated. Why does this matter? Well, what we do know is that when people feel connected, and by the way, it's not even the actual experience of connection, but simply the perception of the experience. We feel understood, we feel socially accepted, we tend to be more resilient, we have actually less mental health symptoms, we tend to be more productive in task completion, and we actually have improved cardiovascular immune system functioning as a result of this. Actually, within work, you actually have fewer quality defects and accidents that occur, 70% fewer accidents. Why does this matter even more? What we see in disconnected persons, individuals that feel alone and socially excluded, increased vulnerability to stress, decreased immune system functioning, decline in trust and cooperation, lower prosocial behaviors, and actually, even more so, that Julianne Holt-Lundstadt from BYU showed that a lack of social connection heightens health risk as much as smoking 15 cigarettes a day or having an alcohol use disorder. She's also found that loneliness and social isolation are twice as harmful to physical and mental health as obesity. Another study demonstrated when they looked at 580,000 US adults and found that social isolation increases the risk of premature death from every cause for every race within the United States. But what happens when we actually do feel socially connected and supported? This is the highest single predictor of happiness, especially during periods of high stress. What I loved about the magic force that Chris demonstrated was it wasn't actually just a force that was magical, but was actually the connections and the interactions and the experiences that generated for us. When we feel connected, we have lower blood pressure. It actually reduces the sympathetic nervous system response in us, known as the stress response. It increases resilient thinking and behaviors. And in fact, this is actually quite fascinating, is the social support providers, so the individuals, those of you who are in this room that go about your way to try to kind of create these connections or set up events and experiences for people to interact, to get together. It might be as simple as you hosting a dinner party or setting up time with friends. You have elevated life and interpersonal satisfaction and tend to be 10 times more engaged in routine activities. Why? Well, it's actually because we're actually quite wired for this. So to explain a little bit of why we're so wired for this, we're going to take a little trip down memory lane to the Paleolithic era. Okay, so we're going to go in our little Wayback Machine here, and we're going to go about 10,000 years ago. All right, and 10,000 years ago in the Paleolithic era, which roughly went from 2.5 million to 10,000 years ago. And by the way, this is where like the quiz here. Anybody know what came after the Paleolithic era, or what particularly occurred in human civilization that led us out of the Paleolithic era into the Neolithic Revolution? People are like, I did not know I was going to get an evolutionary history question here. The advancement of farming, agriculture. We settled down, specifically between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in modern-day Iraq, was the beginning of farming and agriculture, which allowed us to have a little bit more sedentary lives, sit around, and think about a few more things, and then years later, create PowerPoint presentations about it. The other thing in this Paleolithic era that occurred was the onset of us. This is when we became who we are, modern Homo sapiens species, humans. Hunter-gatherers, this is the lifestyle that we lived back then, so we are nomadic. All of our descendants and our ancestors, this is the way that they lived. In fact, the sedentary, more kind of stable lives that we live represents less than 1% of all of human history. The other 99.9% of human history, we lived in these small bands or tribes and groups, going from one destination of food source to another. We use basic stone tools and stone and bone tools, as well as crude stone axes. There's a low population density. Groups are made up of small bands, or tribes, no more than 120, 150 people at the very most, and that was at the extreme end. And here was another characteristic of this era for which we all are connected. Danger, danger, and danger. We lived in these small groups, but yet all around us, everything within our environment was pretty much trying to kill us. That sinus infection that I had at 7 years old, well, sorry, Brandon, that probably would have knocked me out, and I would not have been around to talk to all of you today if we were there. Simple little broken bone could be the difference between survival or death. But yet, what we found is that throughout this entire period of time, as we evolved to who we are today, these conditions for which we lived not only helped us evolve to our modern state. When we think about evolution, we oftentimes think about physical traits like this kind of Dexter disposable thumb that we have for these fine motor skills. Another thing that's very common amongst humans is something I'm doing right now, which is called bipedalism, this wonderful locking knees that we have. If you ever go to the zoo, check out the primates, you see that they don't stand up straight because they don't have locking knees. The reason why this is special for us is that we lock knees, it doesn't put strain on our major muscle groups, so we can walk very long distances. Another fascinating thing that occurs is that you see that with our advancement and increasing food intake and protein, our prefrontal cortexes grew. That's a part of the brain right behind your forehead. It got larger. That's why we have these nice flat sloped foreheads. You can understand what it's like for me going to the zoo with my kids as we're looking at the chimpanzees and I'm telling them, look at their sloped foreheads. That's because their prefrontal cortex is actually quite smaller than ours. And as I continued to have this conversation, I noticed I was no longer talking to my kids because them and my wife had already left. But the older lady that I think was a volunteer at the zoo, she was very fascinated by the concept. And so we talked for like another 20 minutes after that. And I found a ride home because they had left. They just ditched me. But no, so in all seriousness, right? We had this incredible environment which was quite dangerous. And as much as we think about physical adaptations, we also have to think about psychological adaptations, the way that our brain evolved during this time as well. And if we think about it and we ask ourselves, well, how did these prehistoric conditions actually impact brain development? What was it about these conditions that impacted us, how we think, and ultimately how we feel and how we relate to each other? Well, one of the things that it did is that it prioritized threat detection. It's better to be safe than sorry. Why was this? Well, because it was better to assume that there was danger for the chance that there wasn't, rather than assume that there was no danger for the risk that there was. So Pat and I were hanging out, we're walking down our own Paleolithic game trail to a watering hole, and we're chatting it up, and Pat says to me, and we're getting close to the watering hole, and Pat says, Brandon, maybe we should pause over here by the bushes of this rock and just scope out the watering hole and make sure everything's fine before we go down there. And I think to myself, Pat, you're always worrying, we're fine, and I go down and do a cannonball right into the watering hole just to startle the pack of wolves or another warring tribe, or band that was over there in that area. Guess who got to go pass on their genes to the next generation, and guess who did not at a time? So what we have is we have these better safe than sorry brains. But the other thing that we developed, they said, hold the clicker up high if you need help here, is that we developed this desire for social support, that there are strengths in numbers. And I remember learning about all of this some years ago, and it recalled a specific memory that I had. In the house that I grew up in, we had a basement, and this basement was scary. And I remember when I was around 10 years old, I kind of got a little, I was kind of getting full of myself, and I thought, I'm going to go sleep down in the basement tonight because I'm independent, and I'm going to demonstrate my independence. And as the lights went off, I lasted about 5 minutes down in that scary basement before I ran upstairs, and I said, I'm not going to do that again. But then I recall another experience in which I had a couple of buddies over for a sleepover. And guess where we slept? It was down in the basement. And I remember thinking to myself, I was laying down there, there's no way I would ever lay down here and go to sleep by myself. But having my two buddies next to me all of a sudden made me feel a little bit safer, a little bit more secure. Can anybody else relate to this experience? What it's like? There's this thing about us that when we're around others that we feel secure with, that we feel that we can trust, we develop this incredible ability, this space for courage to occur. The space for us to be able to do things and take on tasks and deal with adversity that we'd never be able to do alone. And this is what I ultimately want to talk about with all of you today, because I think that's ultimately one of the things about PPMD, this organization, that has really resonated with me personally from the very first time that I got involved. Just to underscore how important this is, the need to socially connect and be around others, is that when we experience pain within our brain, social pain, social rejection within our brains, it actually registers in the same part of the brain as physical pain. We actually showed this with these famous cyberball studies where it's a simple enough study. They kind of took someone and they put us in MRI machines and they say, hey, Brandon, we're going to have you play a game for a little bit. And you're just going to play catch. And it's on this computer. It's called cyberball. And you're just going to play catch back and forth with another person. There's another person on the internet that you're playing catch with. And then another person would join in and we'd all play catch with each other. And then eventually what would happen is that I would be excluded from the game of catch. Sneaky psychologists, of course, what this really was a computer generated that was designed to randomly exclude the person in the MRI machine from this game of catch. Now you might think to yourself, well, this isn't like really too big of a deal, right? But to our brain, as soon as you experience that type of exclusion, these people don't want to play catch with me anymore. They're just playing catch with each other. What we see is activation within the regions of the brain that overlap with the same regions that become activated when we experience physical pain. So think about this for a second. Social rejection, social pain, is processed in the same regions of the brain as physical pain. It's so vitally important that over thousands upon thousands of years, millions of years, our brains evolved to prioritize that just as much as physical pain detection. Matthew Lieberman out of UCLA, he actually demonstrated a very fascinating study on how much this overlap is associated with each other, in which they did, you can imagine what this was like. Have you recently, these are college students at UCLA, imagine this advertisement. Have you recently experienced social heartbreak or breakup? Well, boy, oh boy, aren't you a subject for us. Come to our lab because we have a research study that we'd like for you to participate in. So you think about all the, we've all experienced, this in our lives, right? So you think about these poor college students coming in, recently experiencing heartbreak. And what they did was they had three groups. They had the experimental group, they had the control group, and the placebo group. Placebo group received some sugar pills. The control group received nothing at all. And then the experimental group actually was administered 1,000 milligrams of acetaminophen a day. And 2 weeks later, they came back, and what they saw was that the college students who had 1,000 milligrams of acetaminophen a day actually reported less social distress associated with their breakup. Now, let me be very clear. I am not advocating the use of pain medication to deal with breakup and social pain. So if anybody got any ideas out there, that's not what I'm saying. But the point is that it was actually associated because that physical pain and that social pain in the brain actually thinks of it all as one of the same. And actually taking Tylenol helped dilute and dull that type of experience. Here's an example of what we're talking about. So what you're seeing here is the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex and the anterior insulas. These are both regions of the brain that are associated with pain detection. This one's actually even better because on the top, what you see is social pain and physical pain, both in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. Notice the overlap of the regions that are active. And then on the bottom, on the left, you see social distress and pain symptoms, and that's the anterior insula. So as much as we think about social pain, we also have to talk about social reward because ultimately that's why we're all here. So what happens when we experience social reward and connection? This is something that we think about extensively within our hospitals. It's something I think about all the time within my work that I do. And it's fascinating is that, as you would guess, if the brain does pain detection with social rejection, social reward of social acceptance, the brain actually does the opposite and perceives it as reward. It lights up. In fact, the same regions of the brain that become active when we experience any type of pleasurable experiences lights up when we experience social connection or acceptance. Specifically, dopamine and serotonin is released throughout the brain in all these different regions. And which then tells us not only is this enjoyable and pleasurable and important, but remember this because this is significant that we want to remember for next time. UCLA, they actually did research on this for likes within a program that was kind of like Instagram. And what they showed was just getting likes on social media for 32 teenagers increased this dopaminergic pathway, specifically the nucleus accumbens and the ventral tegmental area, which is two parts of the brain highly associated with reward detection and activation. This research gave rise to not only just understanding of how deeply important social interaction and connection is to us, but also helped us understand a little bit more specifically about the type of social rewards that we can be considering and thinking about doing, not just for ourselves, but for the people within our lives. And what we found is that one of the things that are very important for social reward is the experience of status. We want to feel as if our status, our inclusion is not at threat, that we're welcomed and we add value to the group. We like to have a sense of certainty within our connections with others, that people understand and know that at the end of the day, I can have certainty that you're going to be there for me and I'm going to be there for you. Again, think about those conditions in the Paleolithic era and what was going on around us when all of this evolved. The sense of autonomy, you might be thinking, well, how does that have to do with actually social connection? Well, autonomy is actually based on this idea of trust. Is that if the group trusts me enough that I could do some things that they don't have to give oversight, that in itself is rewarding. And then this experience of relatedness, this idea that I'm not alone, that there's other people that kind of understand my experience or have a sense of what I'm going through. Talking to so many of the parents here, talking to so many of the grandparents, one of the things I hear time and time again is what this organization does to create that experience of relatedness, not just for you, but also for your boys. And then obviously this idea of fairness. We like to think that things are fair within the group. What's fascinating is that we also have these things called mirror neurons. Has anybody ever heard of these things called mirror neurons? Someone? Oh, good. I'm glad I brought it up because literally no one's ever heard of this before. Okay, so what are mirror neurons? These are these neurons, their brain cells are peppered all over our brains. And what they do is they become active not by us performing some type of motor function, but simply us observing the motor function in others. Have any of you ever been part of a group like when everyone started laughing, but you didn't get the joke, but you found yourself laughing along as well? I've had this experience. I'm sitting around and I'm feeling good, I'm laughing. I don't know what the hell's going on. I missed that joke, but I'm feeling good right now, right? And we also been around the time of everybody feeling sad. I had this in graduate school. We had this group of students. My goodness, love them, wonderful people, but they were just catastrophizers. The sky was falling all the time, and I'd be feeling good, feeling a good day. I'm feeling confident, secure. This graduate school thing's going to work out. I think I might actually pass and get my degree. And I go talk to them for 5 minutes, and I go, oh my God, I'm going to fail. Everything horrible is going to happen. It's contagious. This is actually due to this concept of mirror neurons, which actually almost serves as how it aids in observational learning and imitation, but actually it serves, there it is, it creates this instant sense of almost like neural Wi-Fi that connects us. In fact, the mirror neurons has been occurring this entire time since I've been up here on the stage. You know why? Because, and by the way, remember this, any of you who ever have to give public speaking. When you're up on stage, what the audience wants more than anything is for you to be secure and comfortable. Because when you're secure and comfortable, that then lets everyone else be secure and comfortable. You ever watch somebody go up on stage and have a panic attack on stage? You're like, yeah, Brandon, thank you, that was me. Thanks for bringing up my past trauma. It's uncomfortable. It's so uncomfortable. I remember sitting there and watching a student give a presentation once, and you clearly see that they're kind of having that fight or flight or freeze response, also known as a panic attack. And I was crawling out of my skin. I wanted to crawl under my desk and out of the room. It was so uncomfortable. This is what we mean by mirror neurons. In fact, there's a subset of mirror neurons that are just devoted to facial reading and facial expressions. We actually have more muscles in our face than any other species on the planet. We have this inordinate amount of brain real estate just devoted to facial reading and facial expressions. Why? Because facial reading actually occurred first in terms of communication before verbal communication, this thing that I'm doing right now. We read, we analyze, and we dissect a level of trust, interest, and engagement by facial expressions. In fact, eyes, when they are dilated and increased, it shows a certain level of interest and arousal within the species. My wife and I, we try to do date nights every once in a while. And knowing this research, we're having a good time. We like to sit at the bar because it's just kind of fun to sit at the bar and get a bite to eat and all that. And I was thinking to myself, this night is really going well. She seems really, really excited. And I looked over at her, deep into her beautiful blue hazel eyes, and saw very small pupils looking back at me. Oh, well, another round. I know, some of you get that, some of you don't. That's okay. What's the point? We are at greater risk now than ever to feel isolated. The negative and positive effects are actually quite clear. How we show up impacts the moods, not just of yourself and the behaviors of yourself, but those around you. It's literally a neurobiological reaction. Why? Because we are wired to connect with others. We are a social creature through and through. And when we feel part of a group, when we feel accepted, when we feel included, when we feel like we're not alone, all these incredible, beautiful things happen. And what we see, as Chris would say, I would argue that's where we start to see magic. Another way to look at this is I refer to as a social ripple effect that starts to happen. And one of the things that I love about PPMD is I think the social ripple effect of this organization, of what it has all over the country, is profound. It connects all of you in all different walks of life in all different parts of this country. And yet we come here for these little time together to share and learn and try to end Duchenne. But at the end of the day, we still have this sense of connection even after here, don't we? And that's a beautiful, magical thing. So how do we want to connect? Okay, I got 5 minutes, Pat, so I'm good. All right. Some ideas. Realize that aloneness does not mean loneliness. Yes, many of your sons are going to want to be by themselves a little bit more often, especially as they're becoming teenagers. I remember being a teenager. Do you all remember being teenagers? I hope you do. Did you want to hang out with your parents all the time when you're adolescents? If you did, I want to meet you. That's kind of weird. I don't know about that. I didn't. Aloneness does not mean loneliness. It doesn't mean we don't check in. It doesn't mean that we don't still encourage engagement. But aloneness does not mean loneliness. Keep this up. Find your community. There's something here. It's not just, yes, the research, the money, the advancement, of the medicine to end Duchenne is the primary goal. I would say the 1B goal is a sense of community that this creates for all of you. Take advantage of technology to connect. Yes, I have to say that I'm a bit traditional in that I like the in-person. I like the real physical interaction and engagement with people. But the technology that we have now today to be able to connect with each other, I was able to have the pleasure of conducting a session with a lot of grandparents affiliated with PPMD whose grandsons have Duchenne's. And I'll tell you, it was one of the most enjoyable hour and a half that I had, just interacting with different grandparents from all over the country in all different walks of life. But here we were on Zoom, seeing each other's faces, engaging, interacting. And actually some of them have actually reached out subsequently afterwards. We made a connection. We developed a relationship through that experience. Let your hair down during the next couple days while you're here. I know the work that we're doing here and the point and purpose and mission of PPMD is very, very serious. But try to let your hair down a little bit. Open up. Let people get to know you a little bit. Give you a chance to get to know them a little bit more as well. And if you don't have time, try micro connections. This is something that me and my best friend Marty have recently started doing. So Marty, I've known Marty since I was 5 years old. Marty and I met in kindergarten, and Marty has he's a good Irish, Martin Kenny. He's a good Irish boy, and he has he has very curly hair. And when we were 5 years old, he had he had a little bit of a fro going on. It was looking good. And my first experience with him is that I didn't know what biological sex he was. Again, I was 5 years old, so please don't judge. I'm being vulnerable out here with all of you. And so I inquired what natural born sex he was, and that offended Marty quite a bit, in that moment. So much so that Marty hated me for our first couple years of knowing each other. And somehow, some way, we became best friends. And I was best man in his wedding, he was best man in my wedding. Life happened, and the last 10 years, Marty and I have not been able to connect or talk much. And so finally, and literally this happened 2 months ago, we finally got on a phone call, and I was actually thinking about some of the stuff I'm telling about you right now. And I said, Marty, what if we just made a commitment that either when I'm driving home and you're driving home, let's just call each other, even if we have to chit-chat and we only have time for 5 minutes. Would that be fine? Because I kept on building up this idea that if I was going to call him, I had to call him with something significant. I don't know if this is a dude thing. It's why are you calling? It's do you need something? Is something wrong? I was no, just checking in. Well, what's up with that? Why are you checking in? What's going on? Is everything okay? Is something wrong? I was no, I just want to check in. And he agreed. He said, okay, you know what, that'd be cool. And so this is something that we've been doing routinely now. He'll give me a call, I'll give him a call. We talk for 5 minutes, and that's it. And I'll tell you what, standing here right now, it feels so good to know that I have that kind of door open again with my old best friend, even if it's for a few minutes of a day. Give grace and learn to forgive. This is something that I do not think we get a lot of good role modeling anymore for. As human beings, we are fundamentally flawed. We say silly things, we make mistakes, we do things that ultimately upset ourselves and upset others. You got to give yourself a little bit of grace, give some others some grace, and learn to forgive. And if we give ourselves a little bit of time, what we realize is that the things that sometimes we think create so many differences amongst us are just the minority of the things, because there's so much more that we actually have in common. Some more ideas: address the negative thoughts underlying loneliness, especially if you're seeing this in your sons or seeing in others. Research has shown that actually challenging the underlying negative beliefs around self-worth and about how people perceive them is one of the most healthy and effective ways of increasing more social engagement. We don't realize, and we oftentimes hide this, where our thoughts of self-doubt and self-worth and how much we're actually going to be accepted impacts our willingness to engage. And we start to realize that we actually all have value and we all have worth, and the reality is the people who don't want to hang out with you and aren't interested with you, here's the good news: there's a lot more that are. So work on that. Here's a very, very simple practical one. Practice the half smile technique. This comes from Marsha Linehan, who's a dialectical behavioral therapist at the University of Washington. Showed that just walking around with a half smile in itself just actually not only makes you feel better, but actually increases the likelihood that you're going to have some social engagement or interaction with others. Now, don't walk around with a full smile, okay? Because if you walk around with a full smile, like, someone's going to think something's wrong. They might be thinking that you took the advice earlier that I said and you're on drugs. We don't want that. Okay, none of that, right? But the half smile technique. At the hospital, I give this presentation a lot, and I talk to a lot of groups, and I say, challenge me. If you see me not doing the half smile in the hallway, challenge me and call me out. My goodness, that's a great self-accountability measure, because every time I'm out in the main hall, in the main area of the hospital walking around, I'm like, oh, half smile, Brandon. And you know what happens when I do this? Parents and patients smile back. Other people that I don't even know that work at the hospital, they smile back. Yes, there's some of them that look down and say, I just ignore that guy, I don't know what he's doing. That does happen. But more often than not, people smile back. And I guarantee that carries on to their next interaction that they have as well. That's the social ripple effect at practice. 3 new social gratitudes. Here's a great exercise for you to do or to promote others within your family. Each day, try to come up with, for at least 1 week, come up with 3 new social gratitudes. 3 new things for which, socially, people in your life or connections that you have that you're grateful for. I guarantee by the end of that week, you will wake up feeling quite good. And you'll go to sleep feeling quite good as well. It's a simple little technique, but it works wonders. Random acts of altruism. In fact, research has shown that random acts of altruism, just randomly doing nice things for another person for no other reason other than just to do it, actually releases dopamine within the brain. Again, that mood pleasure neurotransmitter that makes us feel better, makes us feel good. Think about that again. How wonderful it is that as a species, when we do random nice things to others, there's actually a neurobiological reward that occurs for us. What a beautiful thing. And doesn't that say something actually quite significant and positive about all of us? I love this idea. Google came out with this tagline some years ago, be together, not the same. I love this idea. Okay, being together and being a group doesn't mean that we all have to kind of conform to some type of idea of how we're supposed to act and behave. We can be different people from different walks of life. We can have different ideas. We can dress differently. We can act differently, but we can still be together. I have a very diverse team at the hospital, and I'll tell you, I love spending time of all of us together because we bring so many different thoughts and ideas and experiences to the table, and it always enriches the tapestry of our mosaic together that much more. And then the last thing is to remember that everybody has a story. You all have a story. I have a story. Everybody has a very fascinating, interesting story. As a psychologist, one of the best privileges in my life, and the reason why I love my profession so much, is I get the chance to sit down and listen to people's stories and understand just how amazing and interesting they are. And inevitably, someone does or says something that you don't like, and it makes you feel a little rejected, makes you feel a little upset or annoyed. Just remember that everybody has a story, and that person might be carrying something that you don't even realize. just like they don't realize what you're carrying. So what does healthy support look like? It's non-judgmental and accepting. Find those people that do that for you. It helps you normalize. It helps you realize that, what you're going through, you're not just the only one. It facilitates new perspectives. The best social support in life, if you think about it, they help us look at things a different way. They help us see things from a different angle and a different point of view. They don't just automatically condone and enable a singular way of looking at any particular situation. They allow us to be less than perfect. My goodness, how much energy we spend trying to be and act in ways, to be accepted. But the best groups are the ones in which they allow us to not be perfect. That then goes along with allowing us to be vulnerable. And it reminds us, though, that we are capable of many things. And most importantly, it reminds us that we're not alone. And I can sleep in that downstairs basement knowing that I don't have to be scared because I have a couple of buddies next to me to keep me company and give me that courage. So in summary, we're deeply social creatures and we need it. We are more at risk than ever for social isolation and loneliness, but we're wired to connect and have influence over those social neural networks of the people around us. And we all need a community and social place to feel accepted and understood. You being here right now is actually a great start. And that's what I refer to as finding your us. Thank you.